And we're live. Hey everyone, it's Brian with the Chronicler's Tale. Do another live stream ambush. Maybe I'll record these and do them in the future. I don't know. As far as exposure and whatnot and getting traction, maybe not. We'll see. Anyway, today's topic: humanity experiments with civilization. So, observation I was making. Right now, I'm rereading the novel Shogun. If you're an older folk like me, you might remember the miniseries. A miniseries is exactly that. Instead of being a movie or a single episode, it'd be like a 3-part miniseries, a 5-part miniseries, a 7-part miniseries, where there'd be 7 episodes over the course of 7 weeks, released for something. In this case, Shogun, which is a book from the late 70s and starred Richard Chamberlain and Toshiro Mifune, who starred in a lot of the Akira Kurosawa movies. Fantastic actor. Always usually play a lot of strong, thoughtful characters. Anyway, the premise of this book is that it is the 1600 and an English captain played by Richard Chamberlain is piloting a Dutch ship. They're going around the Cape of Good Hope. No. Cape of Magellan Strait at the tip of South America, with the whole goal of reaching Japan. I think at the time only the Jesuits and the Spanish and Portuguese were involved with trade with them. And the book itself illustrates them about, I don't know, a sixth of the way through. And the book illustrates contrasts in culture. And it looks at the very rigid caste system of Japan at that time, as well as the very martial nature of their culture, and contrast that through the captain, the pilot, his character, with his background being from Europe, where he reflects on in his inner thoughts about his observations of, my gosh, it's so clean and how they live, and comparing that with what he knows from living in Europe. And so I'm looking at this contrast and realize, when I say take this and then what it highlights with exposing the reader to the nuances of the older Japanese culture. Then if you take that and pile that on top of Dan Carlin's hardcore history series, Supernova in the East, where it takes the basic tenets of Japanese culture, as far as the old martial culture that Shogun, that takes place during, it has its roots in ages like Shogun in this book. And then how does that translate to the nation of Japan going to war prior to, in the early days, and then during World War II. So you take those compound points where they expand on that very rigid martial culture where honor and there are no prisoners taken and you're fully devoted to the emperor. And as Dan Carlin put it, the Japanese do things, but more so, where there's an intensity to, whatever they do, there's a certain intensity to it. And I take using that as an example, looking at culture. And then recently, I think it was, only last week, that U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance gave that speech on free speech in Europe with that summit. I think it was related to the NATO summit, maybe. And I look at Europe and as a culture, as a separate peoples, both in the individual countries, but as the continent as a whole. And then we look over the United States and how we live as a whole. And you could say how Europe is much more cautious in their approach, where they take things, everything from structuring legislation to how they manage the public voice, how they manage public and human safety, like say with cell phones, or with cell phones, it's a more cautionary approach of, well, if there's a chance it might harm children, then we should probably not take the chance. Or with food, if there's a chance it may be, cause harm in some way, shape, or form to soil, to animals, to plants, to people, let's go better safe than sorry. But also too with like free speech, and there's a chance it could cause harm and lead to bad things. So we're going to take the cautionary approach and say, you can't do that. Compare that with, say, going on to the next point, the United States, which runs a lot looser on the reins, where we're a land that if someone has an idea, they can go and try it. That's why we have cell phones. That's why we have a lot of the technological innovations in our life that we do. That's why we have rideshare. That's why we have a lot of the internet applications that we do. That's why we have 40 flavors of Fanta soda, 10 different kinds of cornflakes, and the variety of things that we do, because we have a culture that has developed that is open to people trying new ideas and seeing how they work. It in a way, it's almost we're a little bit more willing to leap before we look, whereas Europeans are a little bit more, let's hold things on the cautionary side and be more mindful, and let's think about this first. Which, when you take the US, you take Europe, you look at Japan, and what I highlighted a few moments ago, there is no wrong approach. It's all just humanity playing around with different ideas of how we want to try and live. The things that work will continue, and the things that don't will eventually die away. If you think about Europe during the Middle Ages, maybe I could say the Dark Ages, the medieval days, the idea of like flagellation, I hope I pronounced that correctly, where a priest, and it could have been more than just priests, there was a certain dignity and acknowledged piousness to whipping your back. I do this in the name of the Lord. I do this to show how pure of heart I am. And today we'd look at that and go, you got some strange kinks, or you're out of your GD mind, pal. The notions of slavery as something that is commonly accepted in the framework of punishment or consequence for being the losing side in warfare. And there was a great book. I can't remember I'm remembering the name. He's written a lot of books and wrote a good one talking about slavery and indentured servitude in the U.S. colonies. Melton. Gosh, the name will click in my head. I'm seeing it. It's like both first and last name, I believe, start with an M. But he wrote a really heavy one on just the history of slavery. And in certain cultures, it wasn't just, your chattel and you're just property. In a lot of cases, slavery would be almost like you lose your rights so much as it's almost like having not a hostage, but when your enemy, like a child or member of your family, lives with under the protection of your enemy, where it's essentially sort of like a hostage situation without being called a hostage situation. Gosh, the term's slipping my mind, but it'd be something like that where you wouldn't be doing, field hand work as people in the U.S. would a lot of people in the U.S. would recognize slavery as the labor slavery, but it'd be more of a servitude due to, in this case, you lost a war. Let me back up a few steps to catch my track. Oh, experimentation with cultures. Then the idea of this sort of practice died over time, where we said, you know what, it's worked in a lot of ways. There was an economic benefit in a lot of cases where people could use people for slaves for all sorts of labor and convenience and pleasures, and a slave or someone who has been set into it, could be traded for money, for value. That's pretty much, as an accepted practice, has been slipped away and is no longer a commonly accepted thing, a generally accepted thing. And there's a lot of practices, I think, for as messed up, say, for example, North Korea, as in contrast to how the rest of the world lives, how messed up North Korea lives to live, for people to live under an absolute dictatorship, an absolute totalitarianism. In the human sense, if you look at Earth as a place where beings can incarnate into different types of experiences based on culture, living conditions, time and place and history, and experience living with different variables, kind of almost like a video game where you can decide, what kind of world you want to live in, what sort of characteristics you want your character to have. North Korea represents a very unique circumstance that a lot of beings in the course of the lives they live through and experience, have something unique about that. And it creates an interesting contrast point. I mean, in the end, North Korea is either going to cease to exist and everyone there will be dead, or they'll eventually come around and join the rest of the world, and it'll just people. It will definitely have unique roots. And I think that for generations after North Korea begins integration with the rest of the world, you're going to see genetic, because it's been through multiple generations at this point. You're going to see cultural carryover, and you'll be able to see for some generations afterwards, you'll know when you'll see characteristics that'll point out and make someone stand out whether loudly or subtly, as having North Korean roots, or possibly even genetically to some extent. You're going to see that energetic encoding within the gene work, whether it's something with health conditions or height or stature or something physical, whatever it is. You'll see that, and you see these things with a lot of cultures. This is genetically, this is how culture and conditions over generations encodes DNA, and leads to how you can have Slavic peoples. And I saw this on, I think it was Twitter, where it had 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 different distinct Slavic cultures, like Croat, Slovene, Russian, Serbian, a few others. And it took a composite of like 100 men, 100 women, and they all generally were similar, but there were slight variations to, like, the shape of the jawline, the width of the head, length of the nose, the eyebrow ridge, all that stuff. And yeah, all this stuff is just making me realize how much everything that we do, whether we're experimenting with with different ideas, cultural ideas, like say, all the stuff that falls under the whole not the woke movement, but the this is not my night for digging into memory, but progressive, there we go, like progressive ideas, or liberal democracy ideas, or neoconservative ideas, all these different ideas. Humanity gets to try these out and try and figure these out and see what works, what doesn't, what lasts, what fades with time, what sticks around. I mean, in the end, the pragmatic stuff that conforms more to the boundaries of the physical world, and also tendencies of human behavior, those are the things that tend to last. I'm starting to see that. After my time so far, that's what I'm starting to see, and that humans will experiment with ideas, but if they're not grounded, how well they succeed, how well they're grounded to pragmatic principles and human behavior, has a hand, or has a variable of how long it lasts around. So yeah, that was pretty much it. It was just sharing some insights and thought, being able to look at human cultures as large scale collective experiments. So I'm going to wrap this one up, and I don't know, maybe the next one I'll just record it and then set it as a premiere, so it's got multiple days notice. I'll experiment and see, does one format end up getting more eyeballs than another? I don't know. Sometimes I like just recording on the fly, just because I don't need to do any postscript, and yeah, the idea is fresh in the head. So with that, I will say thanks for tuning in, and you can follow the Chronicler's Tale on the social media websites listed in the show notes. And with that, we're going to go back. Be well, everyone, and talk to you soon. And we're done.